And welcome to our first Family Voice Zoom interview of the year. My name's Andrew McColl. I'm the Queensland Director of Family Voice Australia. And it's my pleasure to introduce to us tonight Mrs. Kirralie Smith, who is a spokeswoman and Director of Binary, not afraid to confront transgender ideology in her local sporting competitions. She's now successfully withstood 5 courtroom attempts to silence her. Professor John Whitehall is a professor of paediatrics at Western Sydney University. He's written extensively on the subject of transgender, one of his speeches in 2021 being entitled "The New Ideology of Gender Fluidity." So the plan this evening is to run the session tonight for up to an hour. And we look forward to the contributions from our 2 speakers. Possibly Malcolm Roberts will be coming in if we can make the connection with him. But welcome, Dr. Whitehall and Kirralie Smith.
Thank you.
Good.
So just starting with you, Dr. Whitehall, just thought I'd ask a question to you. You've practiced medicine since the 1960s and your professorship is in paediatric medicine. You mentioned recently that the chromosomes don't lie. Does this fact alone preclude a boy becoming a girl or a girl becoming a boy?
Can I first of all say that you named the university, but I don't represent the university. There would be many people there who would have very distinct and opposing views.
Sure.
So I'm speaking for myself. Okay, the issue is what is real? Are feelings real, or is the chromosomes real? And you are, according to the chromosomes, either male or female, the XX in a female or XY in a male. Now, the issue is that people psychologically convinced, or some kind of inner voice, they say, that they are born in the wrong body, and developments in pharmacology have allowed them to take hormones which will evoke the external appearance. And with developments in surgery, then cosmetic surgery can alter the genitalia, remove the testes in the boy and the ova in the girl, and try and create what are effectively cosmetic surgical appendages. So the whole business, then the person is convinced they're of the opposite sex to the one they were born with, and then use the hormones and the surgery to bring the external experience, because it doesn't alter the internal chromosomes or the effect on the head to that in the brain, which is also part of that. But it's the idea is to make the external as approximately as you can to the gender that you desire. That's the idea.
Right. So last year you travelled to Europe to investigate attempts that were being made then to somehow bring about sex changes in teenage children. So what did you discover over there?
Well, first of all, the first stage is social affirmation. The person thinks he's born a boy and he thinks he's a girl, so he gets a girl's name and dresses and toilets and poster girl at the school and so forth, or the other way around if it's a boy. So the social affirmation is the first and very powerful step, incidentally, in this process of affirmation to the chosen gender. That's step number 1. Step number 2, if it's a child, what advances in medicine in other ways allow the development of chemicals which will block the process of bringing about puberty. So these hormones that you block, we call GnRH, gonadotrophin releasing hormones. They are made in your head, and they travel vertically to ova and sperm or your testicles in order to create them and then to cause the release of hormones that bring about those secondary effects. But the issue coming out of Europe, but it's not a new issue. It's been around for a long time, is that those hormones don't just go in a vertical sense to your sex organs, but they go sideways into the rest of your brain. It is known that there are receptors for these hormones throughout your brain. And what do they do? Well, what is now understood from experiments in the Petri dish in the laboratory or with animals and so forth, and even now to humans, this is the issue. It is showing that the hormones have a horizontal effect in which they stimulate the development of neurons and then make sure they are functioning properly. So this is a very important neuronal capacity, purpose. It's there on purpose to make your brain grow and develop it. Okay, so what is an international group in Europe, and with scientists from Spain and Germany and France and Belgium and others. They were looking at a model of Down syndrome. What is seen is that when you have a neuron growing in a dish in the laboratory and you put the hormone blocker on it, it doesn't function properly. It doesn't send out all the communicating branches with which it talks to everybody else. They noticed these characteristic features. But then I think this is what happened, but we talked on other things, but they noticed that these things in the dish and these things on the animals were similar to the histology that happens in a Down syndrome person. So what's Down syndrome? We all know what a Down syndrome person looks like. It's caused by the possession of an extra chromosome. Too many cooks spoiling the broth. Well, what's the broth? We know the characteristic features and so forth, but the part of the broth is that the brain doesn't develop properly, and it's an ongoing insult to the brain, so that by the time they are 40 years of age, almost all have got signs of Alzheimer's disease. Okay, moving on. This is complicated, but it's really important because then they developed a mouse model. And then they began to look at why is this happening, this devolution of neuronal capacity. And what they found was that there was a deficiency in the production of the GnRH hormone. That's the one that gets blocked as part of the affirmation business. So they were saying, well, these mice models, then mice are not thinking very straight, they're not behaving very normally and so forth. And we have found now that they don't have enough of the blocked hormones. Let's give us some. So they gave them the hormone, and lo and behold, very much reversed this deleterious effect on the brain. So this is mice. So then they thought logically, well, let's do this to human beings. So they have a group of human beings. These are adult people with Down syndrome, and they have given them the hormone which is blocked in a physiological way. It comes out of your head at it pulses every 90 minutes. So they had to do that. And what they found is that the cognitive ability of these people with Down syndrome improved. Do you see the issue here? The people are giving blockers on purpose to children, alleging that doing so allows them to think more correctly about who they are in life, they are a boy or a girl or not. Allegedly, it gives them a chance to think more clearly. But they found that the lack of this stuff interferes with the thinking. And if you replace it in the Down syndrome people, they do better on cognitive testing. This is a most amazing thing. And I don't know why the gender hospitals are not addressing this, because this is a serious accusation about the whole principles upon which they argue their case.
Wow. So just thinking about the way our state health departments have been functioning recently, Professor, do you think our state health departments have tacitly abandoned the Hippocratic Oath to do the patients no harm in their haste to accept a false medical ideology?
Well, in practice, yes, and none more savagely than here in the most draconian state where I happen to be. I hope to get out alive from here. But in Victoria, the law is the most draconian law. If you have a child who is confused about his gender, which is not all that uncommon, and that you then seek to counsel him in the direction of orientating him with the chromosomes that he's got, that is a criminal act here in Victoria, worthy of up to 10 years in jail, plus thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fine. Now, what we know, it was bad in Queensland, then it was a bit worse in ACT, and then the draconian example down here. And the sad thing is that in the New South Wales Parliament, we think that they are producing a bill as draconian as in Victoria. So why would the people do this? Why indeed? That's the question of the century. How has this ideology so captured the minds and the activities of the medical people and the politicians that they would put you in jail for 10 years if you simply tried to orient a child back to the chromosomes with which he was born? I have no answer to that. They've all gone mad.
Wow, that's astonishing. So, Kirralie Smith, now we know that parents can't change health departments overnight. But what important steps did you and your husband take to protect your children long term?
Well, I don't think we set out to protect them necessarily from gender identity ideology, but thankfully the steps that we've taken in raising and educating our children have done that. So we made a choice to homeschool our children or to educate them at home for many, many reasons, but primarily because we know that God gave us our children and that we know and love our children more than anyone else on the planet could possibly do, that we can support them in their strengths and their weaknesses. We can fan those things into flame. We can come alongside them and we can really identify who they are and then also build into them a character. We looked at, well, what sort of adults do we want to produce? And I now have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old. And I'm very pleased to say that, when they were born, we looked at our children, we looked at our family, and we said, well, we want adults. We want to raise children who will become adults that are, responsible citizens, that they serve, they work, they don't sponge off other people, that they are responsible people, that they take personal responsibility for actions and so on. So I think it's really important for parents to look at not just what's happening right now in your family, but what do you want? Like, what do you want to produce? And then you have to work backwards from there and make sure that you're implementing those things. So that was really important to give them a good grounding, solid principles, solid foundation so that they can grow and thrive. And I think that's exactly what they're doing.
Yes, well, we've heard this saying that's been attributed to Edmund Burke that evil triumphs when good men do nothing. So, Kirralie, in the face of a transgender assault, is that what you think is required now of sensible parents, that we all take the protective actions that we can, as you've done?
Look, I do, Andrew, and as every day goes past, more and more, I'm still, it's beyond my comprehension that we even are having these conversations. As Dr. Whitehall has already expressed, nobody can change their sex. It's actually impossible. And it's very cruel to lie to children and to deceive them into thinking if they change their name or wear this costume, that, their confusion or discomfort will be alleviated, because it won't. It creates far more problems. It doesn't address the underlying problems. And so it's really important that parents man up and be parents for a start, draw boundaries for your children, say no to them when you need to say no to them, and really help them identify themselves, regardless of all the stereotypes and everything else that's going on in the world. Help them to grasp who they are and that's really valuable, and they don't need to conform to what's going on in the world at the moment.
So 5 times now, Kirralie, you've challenged the transgender agenda in the context of males participating in female sports in your area. What's been the outcome so far?
Well, I am pleased to say that I have won all 5, and it's all been very different. There were 3 applications for the apprehension of violence orders against me, which, if anyone knows me, just wants to laugh because I'm not a violent person by any stretch, but according to some people, calling males who identify as female male is an act of violence, which is, again, beyond comprehension. But the first one was by an employee of Football Australia, and she withdrew that before it went to court. The second one, the police made the application. They put me through the process of 6 months of mentions and hearing directions and things like that. We arrived at court at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the magistrate was finally ready to hear us. The police withdrew that application without explanation, without apology, and no costs were awarded for me at all. And then the third application for an AVO was went to hearing. It was a private one. Thankfully, the magistrate denied that application because identifying males in female sport is not harassment. It's not, violence. It's none of those things. So it didn't reach the level where the courts were able to intervene. The other 2 are vilification complaints. One has been dismissed. The Attorney General stepped in, and there's still one pending. And we're hoping it will go exactly the same way. But I also had someone defame me, but thankfully we were able to settle out of court, and that was a good resolution. So 5 from 5 with 1 to go.
5 from 5 and 1 to go. Okay. So Dr. Whitehall, I came across a quote from Senator Malcolm Roberts where he spoke in the Senate, of course, saying that our children are not fodder for experimentation and advancing research outcomes for the medical profession. Our children are not profit centres for pharmaceutical companies. End of quote. And going back to what we were saying before, I suppose, Professor, how did this astonishing state come about? And is it a consequence if parents delegate the health care of their children to a government department?
Well, the problem is that there's not much else they can do in states like Victoria. That's the problem. How this ideology is spread is another matter. And even those people who are propounding the use of hormones and surgery to bring about a kind of an ersatz external appearance of the opposite sex, their literature is full of the statements like, this is experimental. Even like the Children's Hospital here in Melbourne, they confess that this is experimental. Now, how they were able to enact that experiment, how the Children's Hospital gave them permission to do it, I don't know. One of the big problems for them, I think, will be not only that it doesn't work and you've got all these people changing their mind and so forth, but they're not informing people. The Children's Hospital here, and I can be quite sort of straightforward on that, maintains that puberty blockers are safe and entirely reversible, and so forth. It appears to me they haven't read the literature regarding the Down syndrome, for starters, but similar literature going back through animal studies and then human being studies and so forth show the contrary. Now, the big High Court example of this was Dr. Rogers, who operated on an eye of a lady, Mrs. Whitaker, and he didn't tell her that operation on one eye could, with a chance of 1 in 14,000, cause a sympathetic autoimmune reaction in the other eye and would go blind. He didn't tell her that because it was such a rare thing. It went and that's what happened. It went all the way to the High Court. And the High Court judges said a doctor must inform of the possibility of side effects, and by inference, even 1 in 14,000, the possession of which knowledge would cause the person to change their mind. Okay, what are they saying? Puberty blockers are safe and entirely reversible. They ignore the whole body of literature, which has been going back to even late 1970s that it has as we mentioned, a neuromodulatory stimulating effect. We were actually talking in a kind of a preparation for I should say there's a court case which is coming up, and there was a discussion, back and forth as to what should be said. And it came up for discussion as to whether the Children's Hospital in one of our cities would be an appropriate place for this person to go. And we said no, because this gender service refuses to even look at it. They must know it. Otherwise, there is a huge absence in their reading. Doctors are supposed to keep up to date with all the reading. Okay, they do not mention any of these listed side effects, apart from thinning of your bones. Who cares about that? It's the thinning of your head that's a serious matter. They refuse to even mention it. Also, before I get off this, I'm sorry, monopolizing. The third, okay, you socially affirm, you put them on the puberty blockers, given alleged time to think things through when you're interfering with the way their brain developments. Then you give them the cross-sex hormones. What does that effect have on the head? Well, in many places, the proper research has been stymied, not allowed, not funded. There's a very basic question. If you're going to put a kid onto cross-sex hormones, what happens to his brain? Let's get some sheep to volunteer, and we will give them, and we'll stand back and see what happens. That basic thing has never been done. It's an experiment, and it's being blocked. I've been talking with people. They just don't get the funding. Okay, there are 2 studies out of Europe, both of which independent studies. What we're asking now is what happens to the brain when you get a cross-sex hormone? Here is the answer. In a male brain, given estrogen, the female hormone, it shrinks at a rate 10 times faster than aging after only 4 months administration, as confirmed by MRI. The female brain does not shrink, it enlarges, not because they're getting more cells, but as a pathological process. Now, this was poo-pooed. I was talking about this in a way and was brought up in one of the family court hearings before they abdicated their role, their gatekeeping role, and this was brought up. And the people who were opposing, like common sense, were saying, Whitehall puts too much basis on animal studies, as if the whole development of penicillin and everything was not based on animal studies, and the effect on the brain is only subtle. Stop for a minute. Can you imagine the fuss that would have come about if one of the vaccines against COVID shrank your brain, even by only 1%? And maybe after 6 months, that would not be a subtle effect. That would have been a huge uproar. But here you've got 2 independent studies on the adult male brain, and it shrinks it in the male. Now, what happens to the developing brain of the adolescent is completely unknown. This is getting back to the unethical experimentation that's going on in the name of ideology.
Wow. Yeah. So just thinking about Professor Whitehall, I'll put this question to you. What would you say as an experienced medical practitioner, pediatrician, what would you say to parents of teenagers who are confused about their gender?
Turn off the internet. But okay, let's get back to the reality of it. It is a criminal act if a parent seeks to advise their child in the privacy of their own lounge room here in Victoria, and probably going to happen in New South Wales, if that parent speaks against the affirmation, tries to persuade some common sense in the child, it is a criminal act. even though it's happening in your own home. That's the draconian nature of this law. You can't believe it. So what would I say? I don't know what I'd say. I mean, of course, you would break the law. You would sit your beloved child down and say, look, here's what I've done, and this is all the side effects of it, and these are the people who are changing their minds, and you think this is going to give you happiness. Hang on a second. The suicide rate in transgendered adults in European countries is at least 20 times higher than the ordinary population. I would be telling them those things. I would also be thinking, oh dear, there's a 75% comorbid rate of diagnosed psychological and psychiatric illnesses. 20% of these kids are in fact autistic. So I would be trying to look at what had gone wrong with the psychology of my daughter or my son, and I would be trying to steer the matter in that direction to get the appropriate counseling and psychotherapy and maybe psychiatric medicines. But let me say one more time, psychotherapy in this great state of Victoria is a criminal act.
Okay. Kirralie, you've had some contact with your political representatives where you live in New South Wales. What would you recommend that people did in terms of the failed policies of the state health departments over transgender? What would you suggest that they encourage their local member
Sure.
in this field?
And Senator Roberts might have more to add to this, but you know, I did go and see both my state and federal representatives. They were very unaware of a lot of these laws and implications. They didn't know that there are males who identify as female being housed in female prisons. They claimed, you know, they didn't know about the laws that possibly, you know, could have got me in trouble, that they're trying to bring in laws to make misgendering a criminal act and the like. My federal member has been a former health in this country. That politicians know what's going on, even though they are the legislators. They are the only ones who can rectify these things by changing the laws. They don't understand. So it is up to each one of us to make sure that we go along, that we inform them, and we do it constantly. We don't just do a one and done and think, oh, they're not listening to me, they don't want to hear about it. Write them emails, make appointments regularly, join up to some of the parties and go along to the party meetings, make motions, inform them what's going on, because this is really serious. As Dr. Whitehall has already expressed, just normal behaviours for parents are now criminalised acts in some states, and medical practitioners are not being able to practice medicine the way they like. You know, me, a mum of 3, has been dragged through the courts for calling males male. It really is out of control in this country, and there's very few politicians who understand or want to understand, but most, they want the votes, they want the numbers, and if they realise that their constituents are upset about these things and are concerned about these things, and they keep informing their politicians, then I think, you know, we may be able to see some of this tide turn.
Right. Dr. Whitehall, do you think that ARPA itself has been caught up in this astonishing business where the basics of biology seem to have been set aside in total opposition to the normal medical care for children?
I think all the medical bodies suffer from this. How does that happen? I think you get most people don't take it seriously in the sense of looking at it intellectually. You have a small group of zealots who come in and who fight like scalded cats and are very painful to take them on, and they get control of the little subcommittees, and it gets bigger. And then the whole organization comes to represent them. But there's a bit of, it's not all bleak news. There's a bit of good news here. The governments of Finland and Norway and Sweden, the state of Alberta in woke Canada, for goodness sake, a number of the states in America, and also there was a reversal in England after the Tavistock business. I don't think that the tide has reversed, but I think it's not running in that direction as quickly as before. Why? Because I think that people are able to speak out and people are being challenged and are taking it a bit more seriously. But none of us feel all that happy about the position of the professional organisations we come under. Although the psychiatrists in Australia, especially I would say under the influence of Philip Morris and other people, Philip is president of the National Association of Practicing Psychiatrists of Australia, and they have brought out, this is what should happen. We should practice psychotherapy. We know that there is an associated comorbidity. We should talk to this kid, work out what the problem is. How did he become confused like this? What's the influence of his peers and so forth? What's he looking at on the web? Is pornography a factor? People are wondering about this, especially in girls. You have access to the web, see anything you want to, and such a horrifying business for them. They would prefer to be on the winning side. So there are things that have not yet been explored, but the peak bodies and not reassuring at this stage. Can I just, I'm perhaps speaking too much, but I would like to just support Kirralie with regard to the sporting business. If you look at all the records of Little Athletics and the records of the New South Wales Department of Education from 5 up, you will find that in all ages, boys run faster and swim faster and jump higher and throw things further. There were, when I counted this, and I'm not going to be careful here, I think there were only 5 records in all that whole business in which were won by a girl. It was a long distance swimming, as I recall, and a long distance walking business, and maybe another 1 or 2. The rest, it's not simply adolescence where the men are better. It's also in children. The big thing that girls do is that they are gymnastically attuned to it. They're far, no, you never see a boy doing anything like those girls do. Is there a biological explanation? Yes, probably. It's that their ligaments are looser. Why? In order to produce healthy children. So this is a sex-associated thing. So I don't believe we should be having, in any shape or form, boys and girls in sort of the same sort of competitions like that, and nor should we have them in the same dressing rooms or things like that as well. That is almost, that we talk of criminal acts. I think that's a criminal act.
So when we think about the fact that we've permitted in this country the transgender ideology, the boy thinks maybe he's a girl, and the girl thinks maybe she's a boy, and she goes ahead and she goes even to the degree of having surgery, take off the breasts, etc., etc. Do you think that this is really